The alarm went off at 3 in the morning. Kira Dalton jumped out of bed and grabbed her tablet. She ran down the hallway before she was fully awake. Something was very wrong at the research station. The station was home to more than 200 scientists. They came from 17 different alien species. All of them studied the animals on planet Venlara Prime. But tonight there was an emergency that nobody expected. Kira rushed into the control room. She found Vorax standing at the screens. He was a big alien with blue scales and 4 arms. His hands moved fast across the controls. He looked worried and scared. "What happened?" Kira asked. She tied her dark hair back quickly. "The Shrike cubs," Vorax said in his deep voice. "All 6 of them. They are gone." Kira felt sick to her stomach. The Shrikes were huge predators from this planet. They looked like giant cats but had crystal spikes on their backs. Adult Shrikes were 3 meters tall and very dangerous. The 6 baby Shrikes were born here 3 months ago. They were part of a program to save the species. "How is that possible?" Kira asked. She looked at the screen showing the cage. The door was still locked. The force fields were still on. Nothing looked broken. "That is what worries me," Vorax said. He showed her heat scans. "The mother Shrike is very upset. She's been walking around for an hour making distress calls. The babies just disappeared. Soon the whole team arrived." Dr. Chen Wei studied behavior data. Security Chief Martinez checked the access records. Young researchers from 5 different species crowded around the monitors. Everyone talked at once through their translation devices. "There is no sign of anyone breaking in," Martinez said. His face showed deep concern. No one entered the habitat area without permission. No one touched the environmental controls. "Could they have escaped by themselves?" asked Lyra. She was a young alien with feathers on her head. Her feathers drooped down with worry. "Maybe they went through the air vents." Vorax shook his big head. "The cubs can barely walk yet. They would die in 20 minutes outside the warm room. They could not climb through the ducts, and the motion sensors would have seen them." Kira watched the mother Shrike through the window. The huge animal was clearly upset. Her crystal spikes flashed with lights that showed her fear. Every few seconds she lowered her head and sniffed the nest where her babies should be. "We need to search the station," Kira said. She took charge of the situation. "If the cubs are somewhere inside, we have to find them before they get sick or die." "I will work with security," Martinez said. He was already moving to the communication panel. "Wait," Chen Wei said. She raised her hand. Her dark eyes looked sharp behind her glasses. "Before we search everywhere, let us think about this. Baby Shrikes bond with their caretakers during the first months. Who has been taking care of them most often?" Vorax looked at his tablet. "The main caretakers are myself, Kira, and our newest team member, Sophie Grant." Kira thought about Sophie. The young woman had joined them 6 weeks ago. She just finished her studies on Earth. She loved working with the Shrikes. She volunteered for extra time with them. Her way of handling the dangerous animals had worried Kira at first. Other researchers kept their distance. But Sophie treated the cubs like they were her own babies. "Where is Sophie now?" Kira asked. Martinez checked his list. "She is off duty. She should be in her room." "Let us start there," Kira said. Something felt strange in her mind. Sophie always acted odd around the Shrikes. She would hum songs while working with the cubs. She seemed calm when the mother Shrike acted aggressive and scared other researchers away. The group walked through the curved hallways. Most people were still sleeping. Only the soft sound of the life support systems filled the air. They reached Sophie's door. Martinez pressed the button. Nothing happened. He tried again. "Sophie Grant, this is Security Chief Martinez. We need to talk to you about an emergency in the animal department." After a long wait, the door opened. Sophie stood there. Her blonde hair was messy from sleep. She wore a very big station uniform. Her gray eyes looked sleepy. She seemed like she just woke up. "What is wrong?" she asked. She tried to hold back a yawn. "The Shrike cubs are missing," Vorax said. His voice was serious. "All 6 of them." Sophie's eyes got big. "Missing? How is that possible?" "That is what we are trying to find out," Kira said. She watched the young woman carefully. "When was the last time you saw them?" "During the evening feeding around 7 o'clock. They were all healthy and playing." Sophie looked worried, but something about her seemed off. She stood with her arms crossed. Her uniform looked very bulky around her middle. "May we come in?" Chen Wei asked gently. "We are talking to all the main caretakers." Sophie waited just a tiny moment before stepping back. Of course, the room was normal for young researchers. It had a small living space with a bed area, desk, and storage. Everything looked normal at first. Then Kira saw the temperature control. Sophie had set her room to 32 degrees. That was much warmer than humans usually liked. "You keep it very warm in here," Kira said. Sophie moved her shoulders up and down, but her hand moved to her stomach without thinking. "I have always liked it this way. I grew up in Arizona. I am used to heat." Then they heard it. A soft crying sound, very quiet but clear to anyone who worked with baby shrikes. The sound came from Sophie herself. Everyone looked at the young woman. Her face turned red. She looked down at her uniform. Slowly, very slowly, a smile grew on her face. It was not a guilty smile or an embarrassed one. It was soft, warm, and she did not feel sorry. "Sophie," Kira said carefully, "what is under your jacket?" Sophie's smile got bigger. She pulled down the zipper on her uniform. What happened next became a famous story throughout the station. 6 tiny heads came out from inside Sophie's uniform. Each one was no bigger than a human hand. The baby shrikes were pressed against her body. They were held in place by something that looked like a special vest under her big uniform. Their crystal spikes were still soft and see-through. They made small sounds as they got used to the light. The room became completely silent. Vorax's forearms hung at his sides. Martinez's hand had started to move toward his weapon before stopping. Chenwei's mouth had fallen open. Only Kira could speak, but her voice was barely louder than a whisper. "Sophie, what have you done?" Sophie laughed softly. That same warm sound that showed she did not feel bad. She gently moved one of the cubs that was slipping. The tiny creature quickly buried itself against her again. It made happy chirping noises. "They were cold," she said simply, as if this explained everything. "The habitat room's temperature system was broken. I noticed it during my work time. The cubs were starting to get too cold. Their mother could not keep all 6 warm by herself. So you took them." Martinez found his voice. Disbelief filled every word. "I did not take them," Sophie said. Her voice became defensive, but she still held the cubs gently. "I borrowed them. For a short time. The repair crews do not come back until 6 in the morning. I sent a repair request, but I could not leave them shaking with cold. Their body temperature was already too low. You broke many security rules," Vorax said. His scales turned darker with anger. "You removed endangered animals from a locked cage without permission. You put yourself and the cubs in great danger." "They were not in danger," Sophie said firmly. "They were perfectly safe. I have been watching their health all night." She pointed to her desk. Kira now saw a medical scanner and several tablets showing health readings. "See for yourself. Their temperature is good, their hearts are steady, and they have been sleeping peacefully for 4 hours." Chenwei moved closer. Her scientific curiosity was stronger than her shock. She looked at the vest with interest. "How did you make this thing?" "I changed a vest from the security supply room," Sophie explained. She carefully supported the cubs as she talked. "I added warm padding and made pockets to spread their weight evenly. The design is based on something we have back on Earth. It is called a baby carrier. Humans have been using them for thousands of years to keep infants close while keeping our hands free." "Baby carrier," Vorax repeated the words slowly, like they were in a strange language. His translator seemed confused by the idea. The scene was both cute and bizarre. Here was a human woman, fresh out of school, casually wearing 6 baby predators like clothing. The cubs, which should be dangerous even at this age, looked completely comfortable and happy. "They could have hurt you," Kira said. Though even as she said it, she knew it sounded silly. The cubs looked as harmless as kittens. "They would never hurt me," Sophie said with complete certainty. "I have been bonding with them since they were born. They know my smell, my heartbeat, my body warmth. I am part of their family now." "Family," Vorax said. His voice had a dangerous edge. "Shrikes do not form families. They are lone hunters. Adult females only take care of their cubs until they can survive alone." "That is what your research says," Sophie agreed. "But I have watched different behavior. When I spend time with them, they play with each other more. They sleep together in a group. The mother seems calmer when I am around." She paused, then said quietly, "Maybe your research is based on shrikes in cages that never had the chance to form proper bonds." The meaning hung in the air. Vorax had spent his whole career studying these predators. To have a young researcher question his work, especially now, should have made him very angry. Instead, he found himself thinking about her words. Martinez cleared his throat. No matter what the theories say, we need to return the cubs to their home right now. The mother must be losing her mind with worry. Actually, Chen Wei said. Her eyes were still fixed on the scanner readings. That brings up an interesting question. Sophie, how did you take the cubs without the mother attacking you? For the first time, Sophie looked a little uncomfortable. I talked to her. You talked to her, Vorax repeated in a flat voice. I know how it sounds, Sophie said quickly, but she understands me. Not the words obviously, but what I mean. I have been speaking to her since she arrived at the station. I told her the cubs were cold, that I needed to keep them warm and that I would bring them back when the habitat was fixed. She smelled me, looked at the cubs, and then moved back. She trusted me. That is impossible, Vorax said, but he sounded less sure. He had seen the mother shrike accept Sophie more than other researchers. But he thought it was random or because the animal got used to being in a cage. Is it? Chen Wei moved to stand beside Sophie. She looked at the cubs more closely. Think about human history. Humans are social animals with an unusual ability to bond across species. They have tamed dozens of species on Earth. Many of them were originally predators or prey. They form emotional attachments to creatures that should not work with them. I grew up with dogs and cats, Sophie added. Both came from predators. Humans have been living with them for thousands of years. We have an instinct for reading body language, for talking across species barriers. It is one of the things that makes us good at studying aliens. Kira rubbed her head. She felt a headache coming. This is all very interesting, but we still have a serious problem. Sophie has broken many rules. The director is going to be very angry if we do not solve this immediately and properly. What if we do a controlled return? Chen Wei suggested. We all go with Sophie back to the habitat. We document the mother's reaction. If she accepts the cubs back without aggression, then we know Sophie's approach works. If not, we have security ready to step in. Martinez nodded slowly. I can work with that. But Sophie, you will face punishment for this. You understand that? I understand, Sophie said quietly. Then she looked down at the cubs. Her face became soft again. But I would do it again. They needed help and I was there to give it. That is what being a caretaker means. As they got ready to leave Sophie's room, one of the cubs managed to wiggle free from the carrier. It climbed up to sit on Sophie's shoulder. It balanced there with its tiny claws holding her uniform. Its crystal spikes caught the light like small rainbows. The cub looked at all the scientists with what seemed like royal curiosity. Sophie laughed softly and gently moved the adventurous cub back into the carrier. Settle down, little one. It is not time to explore yet. Watching this, Kira felt something change in her understanding. Sophie was not just caring for the cubs. She had formed a real bond with them. Something deeper than professional interest or scientific curiosity. It was the kind of connection that went beyond species boundaries. The kind that humans seemed uniquely able to form. The walk back to the animal wing was strange. Word about the found cubs had spread through the station's communication system. They met several off-duty researchers and crew members who heard about the emergency. Each one stopped and stared at Sophie, at the bulge in her uniform, at the occasional movement or sound that showed the cubs were there. No one spoke. They just watched as the odd group walked through the hallways. Led by a young human woman who had apparently decided that the right response to missing predator cubs was to wear them home. The observation room outside the Shrike habitat had never been so crowded. Word had spread through the station very fast. Now scientists from every department pressed against the strong viewing windows. Station Director Hammond stood with her arms crossed. She was a serious woman with silver hair and 40 years of research experience. Her face showed nothing. Beside her stood the station's chief veterinarian. He was an alien named Zilax. He watched the habitat's environmental systems. Temperature control is back online, Zilax reported. His tentacle arms danced across the control panel. The problem was in the secondary heating coil. Maintenance crews have already replaced it. Inside the habitat, the mother shrike kept pacing around. Her huge body moved with predatory grace despite her clear distress. Every few moments, she would return to the nesting area. She would sniff at the spot where her cubs should be. Then she would start walking again. Her crystal spikes flashed with lights that showed her feelings: anxiety, protectiveness, confusion. This is highly unusual, Director Hammond said. Her voice cut through the talking. Sophie Grant, you will write a full report explaining your actions. We will have a disciplinary meeting later today. Yes, ma'am, Sophie replied. She stood near the habitat access door. She still wore the cubs in their homemade carrier. Her face showed nervousness and determination. But right now they need to go home. The procedure is simple, Vorax explained. He talked more for the director than for Sophie. We will use the transfer chamber. Sophie will enter the buffer zone. Then we will open the interior door just enough for her to place the cubs inside. The mother will be held behind a barrier during the transfer. No, Sophie said quietly but firmly. Every head turned toward her. Vorax's scales rippled with surprise. No, that is not how this needs to happen, Sophie continued. If you hold back the mother, she will connect my return with stress and being trapped. It will undo all the trust we have built. Let me go in directly. Let her see me bring her cubs back. Let her understand that I kept my promise. Absolutely not, Martinez said immediately. That animal is 3 meters of muscle, claws, and hunting instinct. She could kill you in seconds. She will not. Sophie said with that same unshakable confidence. She trusts me. I have been working with her for 6 weeks. I have fed her, cleaned her habitat, talked to her. When I took the cubs, I told her I would bring them back. She has been waiting for me. You cannot possibly know that, Director Hammond said. Animal behavior, especially in stress situations, cannot be predicted. The risk is too high. Chen Wei raised a hand. May I suggest a middle way? We allow Sophie to enter the habitat, but we keep a clear exit path. Security people stand ready with sleep dart systems. If the mother shows any aggressive behavior, we pull Sophie out immediately. That is still too dangerous, Martinez said. Chief Martinez, Sophie turned to face him directly. With respect, everything we do as animal scientists involves calculated risks. Every day we work with creatures that could harm us. The difference is trust. I trust this animal and she trusts me. That trust is worth something. Director Hammond looked at Sophie for a long moment. Finally she nodded. Very well. But we do this by rules. Chen Wei's middle way stands. Security teams on standby. At the first sign of aggression, we stop. Understood. Understood, Sophie agreed. The next few minutes were spent in careful preparation. Martinez placed security officers at important points around the habitat. Each one had fast-acting sleep dart systems. Xilax adjusted the observation cameras to track Sophie's movements. Medical staff waited in the next room just in case. Kira found herself standing beside Sophie as they waited for final clearance. You are sure about this? She asked quietly. Sophie nodded. Her hand gently supported the cubs through the carrier. I am sure this is how it has to be. Trust is not something you can keep from behind barriers and force fields. It requires being open to harm. It requires showing up and doing what you promised even when it is scary. Where did you learn that? Kira asked. She was genuinely curious. From every dog I ever trained, every cat I ever befriended, every wild animal I ever helped back home, Sophie replied. Humans have been forming bonds with other species for our entire existence. It is one of the things we are best at. We just have to remember to trust our gut feelings. All systems ready, Xilax announced. Habitat door unlocked. Sophie, you may go when ready. Sophie took a deep breath and walked toward the access door. The observation room fell silent. Even the soft hum of the air system seemed to fade away as everyone held their breath. The door opened with a soft hiss. Sophie walked through into the habitat module. The inside of the habitat was designed to look like the natural environment of Venlara Prime. Fake sunlight came through a projected sky. The ground was covered in moss that smelled earthy. Rock formations provided hiding spots and climbing surfaces. The temperature, now fixed, sat at a comfortable 30 degrees. The mother shrike stopped moving. Her huge head turned toward Sophie. Her sensors flared as she recognized the human. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The cubs, feeling the change in Sophie's tension, begged Sophie began to speak. Her voice was low and soothing. Hey there, beautiful. I am back just like I promised. I brought your babies. They are safe. They are warm. They missed you. The shrike approached slowly. Her movements were careful and deliberate. She lowered her head, bringing her face close to Sophie's. Her breath was hot and smelled slightly of the raw meat she had been fed earlier. It washed over Sophie's face. The human did not move back. She stood her ground, meeting the creature's eyes. Then the shrike did something that made every scientist in the observation room gasp. She pressed her forehead gently against Sophie's shoulder. This was a gesture that Vorax had only ever seen shrikes do with their mates or children. Good girl, Sophie whispered. She reached up to carefully touch the crystal spikes along the shrike's neck. "You are such a good mother. Now let us get your babies back where they belong." Sophie moved toward the nesting area. The mother shrike followed close beside her. Together, they approached the raised platform where the cubs had been born. Sophie carefully opened the carrier and began lifting the cubs out one by one. She placed them gently in the nest. The mother shrike watched closely. Her sensors tracked each movement. As each cub was returned, she would lean in to smell it. She checked its identity and health. The cubs recognized their mother's scent and the familiar environment. They immediately began chirping and making sounds. Their tiny voices filled the habitat with sounds of reunion. When the last cub was placed in the nest, the mother shrike settled down. She gathered all 6 babies close to her body. Her crystal spikes now glowed with a warm, happy light. She looked up at Sophie. The human could have sworn she saw thankfulness in those alien eyes. "You are welcome," Sophie said softly. "They will be warm now. The habitat is fixed, but I will check on you all tomorrow, okay? We will make sure everyone stays healthy and happy." She backed away slowly. She kept eye contact with the mother shrike until she reached the access door. Only then did she turn and exit the habitat. The observation room burst into conversation the moment the door closed behind her. Scientists from a dozen species all began talking at once. Their voices were a loud mix of amazement and disbelief. Director Hammond simply stood there, shaking her head slowly. "I have been doing this for 40 years, she said to no one in particular. 40 years, and I have never seen anything like that." Vorax approached Sophie. All 4 of his arms hung at his sides. This was a gesture of submission that was rare for his species. "I owe you an apology," he said. His deep voice was full of emotion. "I have studied these creatures for most of my life. Yet you understood them in ways I never imagined possible. Your approach, your instincts, they showed something I had missed in all my research." "You did not miss anything," Sophie said kindly. "You just approached them as a scientist. I approached them as a friend. Both perspectives are valuable. Maybe together we can learn even more about them." The incident report took 3 days to write. It was 47 pages long. It included testimony from every witness. It had detailed analysis of the security footage. It had behavioral assessments from Chen Wei. It had an extensive breakdown of Sophie's methods. Director Hammond read every word twice before calling the disciplinary committee into session. Sophie sat alone in the waiting area outside the director's conference room. Her hands were together in her lap. She had submitted her resignation that morning. She did not want her actions to hurt the station's funding or reputation. Whatever happened next, she was prepared to accept the results. The door opened. Kira came out telling Sophie to enter. The conference room had a long table. Director Hammond sat there with Vorax, Chen Wei, Martinez, and 3 other senior researchers. Their faces showed nothing. "Dr. Grant," Director Hammond began. Sophie noted she used her title rather than her first name. "We have reviewed your case extensively. Your actions broke many rules designed to ensure the safety of both people and research subjects. You went around security systems. You removed endangered animals without permission. You knowingly put yourself in danger." Sophie nodded, keeping her face neutral. "I understand, ma'am. However," the director continued, "your actions also saved the lives of 6 critically endangered creatures. Your assessment of the environmental failure was correct. Your improvised solution was effective. Your understanding of the mother shrike's psychology proved remarkably accurate. Moreover, you have provided insights into shrike behavior that have significant meaning for our conservation efforts." Sophie blinked in surprise. This was not the direction she had expected the conversation to take. Vorax leaned forward. His scales shifted to a lighter shade that showed openness. "Since your interaction with the mother shrike, we have observed remarkable changes in her behavior. She is more relaxed, more interactive. The cubs are developing faster than previous litters. Their socialization patterns are different and healthier than anything in our records. We believe," Chen Wei added, "that your human capacity for cross-species bonding has created an environment that more closely copies natural conditions. The mother shrike does not just tolerate captivity anymore. She seems to understand that she is being cared for. That changes everything." Director Hammond put her fingers together. "We are not excusing your violation of rules. You will receive a formal warning. You will be required to take additional safety training. However, we are also creating a new position on the station. We are calling it Cross-Species Relations Specialist. It will involve working with our research subjects to establish trust-based care approaches, particularly for species that have shown resistance to traditional captive management methods. We would like you to fill that position, Vorax said. Sophie sat in stunned silence for a moment. You are not firing me. We are promoting you, Hammond said with the hint of a smile, though I expect you to develop proper rules for your methods, so we can train others and ensure safety standards are maintained. No more midnight cub rescue operations without permission. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I will not let you down. Over the following weeks, Sophie's approach began to change the station's animal biology program. Working closely with Vorax and his team, she developed what they called contact-based conservation methods. The system emphasized building trust relationships between researchers and research subjects. It used techniques adapted from human-animal training traditions. The results were remarkable. Species that had previously shown high stress levels in captivity became calmer and more cooperative. Reproduction rates improved across multiple programs. Perhaps most significantly, animals began showing social behaviors that had never been documented in captive populations. Sophie worked mainly with the shrikes, but her methods spread to other departments. The station's bird specialists began adapting her techniques for their animals. The ocean biology team asked for advice for their very shy deepwater specimens. Even the plant department wanted to discuss her approach to sensitive plant species. The shrike cubs grew rapidly. Their bond with Sophie only strengthened. By the time they were 6 months old, they recognized her voice from across the habitat. They would rush to greet her during feeding times. Their crystal spikes flickered with excited patterns. The mother shrike had become so comfortable with Sophie's presence that she would sometimes leave her cubs in Sophie's care while she explored other areas of the habitat. One afternoon, Kira found Sophie sitting in the observation room. She watched the cubs play fight under their mother's watchful eye. The senior researcher had become something of a teacher to Sophie. She helped her navigate the political complexities of station life while respecting her unusual methods. How are they doing? Kira asked. She settled into the chair beside her. Wonderfully, Sophie replied. Her face lit up. 2 of them tried to hunt a service robot yesterday. They are developing their hunting instincts right on schedule, and look at the way they coordinate their movements. That is pack hunting behavior. None of the books mention that shrikes hunt together. Maybe they do not, Kira suggested. In the wild. But these cubs have been raised differently. They have you, Sophie smiled. That is the thing about social bonds. They can change behavior in unexpected ways. Humans tamed wolves thousands of years ago. Those wolves became dogs. They did not just change physically. Their entire social structure evolved to include humans as part of their pack. Maybe we are seeing the beginning of something similar here. Do you think shrikes could be tamed? Kira asked. She was intrigued by the possibility. I think any species can learn to live together with another if there is mutual benefit and respect, Sophie said thoughtfully. Taming is not about making animals less dangerous or less wild. It is about building a relationship where both species choose to cooperate. Humans are good at that. We have been doing it our whole existence. News of Sophie's work began to spread beyond the station. Research facilities across the galaxy asked for information about her methods. Animal scientists from dozens of species wanted to learn her techniques. The Galactic Conservation Council invited her to present at their annual conference. But perhaps the most unexpected response came from the planetary government of Venlara. The shrikes were their world's top predators. They were symbols of strength and survival. For years they had striven to make. The transport ship Galileo came down through the atmosphere of Venlara Prime on a clear morning. The planet's 3 moons were visible in the brightening sky. Sophie stood in the cargo bay. One hand rested on the reinforced habitat module that housed the shrike family. Through the transparent panels, she could see the mother shrike's crystal spikes glowing with an unusual pattern. Anticipation, recognition. The creature somehow knew she was coming home. The cubs, now nearly adult-sized at 8 months old, pressed against the viewing panels. Their sensors flared as they detected the changing environment. Sophie had been working with them daily, preparing them for this change. They knew her commands, trusted her judgments, but they were still wild creatures at their core. This homecoming would test everything they had learned together. The landing site was in the Azurite Valley. It was a protected wilderness area that had once been prime Shrike territory. The government had cleared the region of settlements. They designated it as a conservation zone. If Sophie's methods proved successful here, similar programs would be established across the planet. As the ship settled onto its landing legs, Sophie felt a hand on her shoulder. Kira stood beside her, wearing field gear and carrying a medical kit. The senior researcher had insisted on coming with the expedition. She claimed someone needed to document everything for the scientific record. Sophie suspected Kira simply could not bear to miss what would happen next. "Ready?" Kira asked. Sophie nodded. "As ready as I will ever be." The cargo bay door opened. The smells of Venlara Prime flooded in. Alien flowers, mineral-rich soil, and something else. Something wild that made Sophie's heart race. The mother shrike's spikes blazed with light. She made a sound that Sophie had never heard before. It was part roar, part song. It echoed across the valley. In the distance, something answered. Then another, and another. The wild shrikes of Azurite Valley were calling back. Administrator Kieran approached with a team of conservationists from Venlara. "The valley population is small," he explained. "Perhaps 20 individuals. They have avoided contact with settlements, but their numbers continue to drop. We hope your shrikes might help stabilize the population." "First, we need to let them adjust," Sophie said. "The change from captivity to freedom should be gradual. We will set up a temporary enclosure. Let them explore in controlled stages. Give them time to remember what it means to be wild." Over the next 3 weeks, Sophie and her team worked to create the perfect balance between safety and freedom. The temporary enclosure spread across 10 hectares of pristine valley floor. It was large enough for the shrikes to hunt, explore, and establish territories, but secure enough to prevent early encounters with the wild population. The cubs adapted quickly. Within days, they were hunting small prey animals. Their pack coordination was more effective than anything Sophie had seen in the research station. The mother shrike spent hours teaching them. She showed hunting techniques that had never been documented by animal scientists. Sophie watched and recorded everything, her respect for these creatures growing daily. But the most remarkable changes happened in how the shrikes interacted with the conservationists from Venlara. Following Sophie's methods, the local team began building their own relationships with the animals. They learned to read the crystal spike patterns, to understand the sounds, to move with proper body language that showed respect rather than threat. One evening, as the planet's 3 moons rose over the valley, Sophie sat outside the enclosure with a young conservationist named Leora. The woman had taken to Sophie's methods with natural skill. Now she watched the shrikes with the same wonder and respect that Sophie had shown from the beginning. "I never imagined they could be like this," Leora said softly. "Growing up, we were taught to fear shrikes. They were monsters from the wilderness, creatures that killed livestock and threatened our settlements. But watching them with you, seeing how they respond to kindness and respect, it changes everything." "Fear usually comes from not understanding," Sophie replied. "Once you take the time to learn about another creature, to see the world from their viewpoint, fear changes into something else. Appreciation, connection, sometimes even love. Is that what you feel for them?" "Love." Sophie smiled. "I feel the same thing I felt for every dog, every cat, every wild animal I ever helped back on Earth. They are not pets. They are not below me, but we understand each other. We have chosen to trust each other. That is a kind of love, yes. Different from human love, but no less real." The decision to open the enclosure came after careful observation and discussion. The cubs had reached maturity. They showed all the skills they would need to survive in the wild. The mother shrike had begun showing signs of restlessness. Her attention was drawn increasingly toward the distant calls of the wild population. It was time. Sophie stood before the main gate at dawn. Her hand was on the control panel. Behind her, the entire research team had gathered. Administrator Kieran was there with dozens of officials from Venlara who had come to witness this moment. Kira stood ready with recording equipment. Vorax had his sensors set to track the shrike's movements once they left the enclosure. The mother shrike approached the gate. Her 6 cubs flanked her. They seemed to understand what was about to happen. Their crystal spikes glowed with patterns Sophie had learned to read. Excitement, anticipation, gratitude. Sophie knelt down, bringing herself to the level of the cubs. They gathered around her, nuzzling against her with surprising gentleness for creatures that now stood taller than she did. She ran her hands along their spikes. She felt the energy pulse beneath her fingertips. "You are ready," she told them softly. "You are strong, you are smart, and you are together. Take care of each other out there. And remember, humans are not all threats. Some of us are friends." The mother Shrike stepped forward. For the last time, she pressed her forehead against Sophie's shoulder. The gesture held such emotion that Sophie felt tears streaming down her face. This creature, this magnificent predator who could have killed her a dozen times over, had chosen instead to trust her, to consider her part of the family. Sophie stood and activated the gate. It swung open with a soft hum. It revealed the untamed wilderness beyond. The mother Shrike paused for just a moment, looking back at Sophie. Then she stepped through. Her cubs followed in a coordinated line. They moved across the open ground with hunting grace. Their crystal spikes caught the morning sunlight and created rainbows in their wake. In the distance, the wild shrikes began calling. Their voices welcomed the newcomers home. The mother responded with her own call, powerful and clear. The cubs added their voices, creating a chorus that echoed through the valley. Then, as one, they broke into a run. They disappeared into the wilderness with the smooth efficiency of creatures born to hunt and roam. Sophie stood at the gate long after they vanished from sight. She listened to the distant calls growing fainter. Kira came to stand beside her, saying nothing, just offering the comfort of presence. The other researchers began to leave. They talked excitedly about what they had witnessed. "Will they come back?" Administrator Kieran asked quietly. Sophie smiled through her tears. "Maybe, if they need help, if they want to visit. That is the thing about relationships built on trust. They last even across distance, even across the boundaries between wild and tame." 3 months later, Sophie remained on Venlara Prime. She worked with the conservation teams to expand the contact-based methods. The wild shrike population had begun to stabilize. Several females had produced cubs. The survival rate was dramatically higher than previous years. The presence of Sophie's original family group had somehow changed the workings of the entire valley ecosystem. Reports began coming in from other regions where conservationists had put Sophie's methods into practice. Across the planet, shrikes were becoming less aggressive toward settlements. Conflicts decreased. Understanding grew. One evening, as Sophie was reviewing data in the Valley Research Camp, a commotion arose from the edge. She rushed outside to find the security team in a state of alert. Something large was approaching through the darkness. Then the crystal spikes appeared, glowing in familiar patterns. The mother shrike emerged from the shadows. Beside her walked her 6 cubs, now fully grown and magnificent. But they were not alone. 3 wild shrikes came with them. They moved with the cautious curiosity of creatures meeting something new. Sophie walked forward slowly. She kept her movements calm and non-threatening. The mother shrike approached and performed their usual greeting. She pressed her forehead against Sophie's shoulder. The cubs gathered around, just like old times, their size now making the gesture slightly funny as they nearly knocked her over with their enthusiasm. "Look who brought friends." Sophie laughed softly. She reached up to touch the nearest cub's spikes. The wild shrikes watched from a distance. Their postures were careful but not aggressive. They were learning, she realized. Learning from the family she had raised that humans could be trusted. Over the following hours, Sophie and her team carefully interacted with the wild shrikes. They used all the techniques they had developed. By dawn, 2 of the 3 wild animals had allowed tentative physical contact. It was a breakthrough that would have taken years using traditional methods. As the sun rose over Azurite Valley, the shrike family prepared to leave. The message came through on Sophie's communicator. Director Hammond's face appeared on the screen and she was smiling. "Sophie, we have received requests from 47 different research stations. They all want to use your methods. The Galactic Conservation Council is establishing a new division specifically for cross-species relations work. They want you to head it." Sophie looked out at the valley, at the world that had become her home, at the work that had only just begun. "I will do it," she said, "but I'm staying here for at least another year. There is still so much to learn from the shrikes, and I think the wild population is starting to trust us. We cannot abandon that now." Hammond nodded. I would not expect anything less. Just promise me you will not smuggle any more predator cubs in your jacket." Sophie laughed. That same soft, warm laugh that had marked the beginning of this adventure. "No promises. You know me, Director. If an animal needs help, I am going to help it. Protocol or no protocol." As she ended the call, Sophie heard a familiar sound in the distance. The shrikes were calling, their voices carrying across the valley in patterns she had learned to understand. They were saying hello, checking in, reminding her that the bond they had formed lasted even in the wild. Sophie stood and walked to the edge of camp. She looked out at the wilderness. Tomorrow she would continue her work. She would teach more conservationists her methods. She would document new behaviors and improve her procedures. She would help build bridges between species that had never existed before. But tonight, she simply listened to the calls of her friends in the darkness. She was grateful for the gift that allowed her to hear not just animal sounds, but a language of trust, connection, and belonging that went beyond the boundaries between worlds. In the end, the story of the missing predator cubs became more than just a tale of one human's unusual methods. It became a symbol of humanity's place in the galactic community. Where other species brought technology, philosophy, or military might, humans brought something equally valuable. They brought the understanding that intelligence came in many forms. That consciousness deserved respect regardless of the shape it took. That friendship could exist between species as easily as between individuals of the same kind. And sometimes, all it took to save a species from extinction was one person willing to lift her jacket, laugh softly at the strangeness of the situation, and show that love and trust could bridge any divide, even the divide between predator and prey, between human and alien, between the tame and the wild. 6 months after the Valley release, Sophie received an invitation that surprised even her. The Galactic Science Assembly wanted her to speak at their annual gathering. It was the most prestigious scientific event in known space. Representatives from 200 civilizations would attend. They wanted to hear about her work with the shrikes. Sophie almost declined. Public speaking was not her strength. She preferred working directly with animals. But Kira convinced her that the message was too important not to share. Other worlds had their own endangered predators, their own conflicts between civilization and wilderness. Sophie's methods could help save countless species across the galaxy. The day of her presentation, Sophie stood backstage in the grand auditorium. The venue was enormous. It could hold 10,000 beings. Every seat was filled with scientists, diplomats, and conservationists from across known space. She felt her heart pounding. "You will be fine," Kira said from beside her. "Just tell them what you told me. About trust, about connection, about seeing animals as individuals rather than problems." Sophie nodded. She took a deep breath. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage. The lights were bright. The audience was a sea of faces and forms. Humans, aliens with scales, aliens with feathers, aliens with tentacles, all of them watching her. She began to speak. Her voice was quiet at first, but it grew stronger as she talked about the shrikes, about the night she found the cubs shivering with cold, about the decision to take them, about building trust with a creature that could have killed her, about the moment the mother shrike pressed her forehead against Sophie's shoulder in acceptance and gratitude. The audience listened in complete silence. Sophie showed videos of the cubs growing, of the mother shrike allowing Sophie to care for her babies, of the release in Azurite Valley, of the wild shrikes learning to trust humans through the example of the family Sophie had raised. When she finished, the silence continued for a long moment. Then the applause began. It started slow, then built into a thunderous wave. Beings from 100 different worlds rose to their feet. Some had hands to clap. Others had appendages that made different sounds. But all of them were showing respect and appreciation. In the weeks that followed, Sophie received offers from research stations across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to implement her methods. Some had apex predators similar to shrikes. Others had different challenges. Aquatic predators, flying hunters, even some species that were dangerous to approach because of toxins or defensive mechanisms. Sophie accepted a position as a traveling consultant. She would spend 3 months at each station, teaching her methods, working directly with their most difficult species, showing that trust and understanding could succeed where force and control had failed. But before she left Venlara Prime, Sophie wanted to visit the valley one last time. She hiked out to the release site at dawn. The air was cool and fresh. Birds sang in the trees. The planet's 3 moons were fading as the sun rose. She sat on a rock near where the temporary enclosure had been. The area looked completely natural now. No sign remained of the human presence. Nature had reclaimed it all. Sophie closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of the wilderness waking up. Then she heard it. The distinctive call of a shrike. Not the mother. One of the cubs, now fully grown. The call came closer. Sophie opened her eyes. 6 adult shrikes emerged from the trees. Sophie recognized them instantly despite their size. They moved with the same personalities they had shown as cubs. The adventurous one who used to climb on her shoulder, the shy one who always hid behind its siblings, the playful one who loved to wrestle. They were all there. Behind them came the mother, still magnificent, still powerful. And beside her walked 3 younger shrikes, new cubs born in the wild. The next generation. Sophie stood slowly. The shrikes approached without fear or aggression. The 6 she had raised came close. They nuzzled against her. Their crystal spikes glowed with patterns of joy and recognition. Even the wild-born cubs showed curiosity rather than fear. The mother shrike performed their greeting ritual, forehead against shoulder. Sophie reached up to touch the familiar crystal spikes. "You did it," she whispered. "You raised your babies. You taught them to survive. You built a new family. I am so proud of you." They spent an hour together, Sophie sitting among the shrikes, talking to them, touching them, watching the cubs play. It was a moment of perfect peace, a moment that showed what was possible when different species chose trust over fear. Eventually, the shrikes prepared to leave. They had their own lives to live, their own territory to patrol, their own hunts to make. But before going, each of the original 6 approached Sophie one last time. Each pressed their forehead against her in turn. A final goodbye. A promise that the bond would never break. As they disappeared into the forest, Sophie felt tears on her cheeks. But they were not sad tears. They were tears of joy, of accomplishment, of knowing that she had made a real difference. She hiked back to camp. Kira was waiting there with coffee and breakfast. "How did it go?" the senior researcher asked. Sophie smiled. "It went perfectly. They are thriving. The mother has new cubs. The family is healthy and strong. They remembered me." Kira nodded. "Of course they remembered you. You gave them more than care. You gave them trust. That is not something any creature forgets." Later that day, Sophie boarded the transport ship that would take her to her next assignment. As Venlara Prime grew smaller in the viewport, she thought about all the animals waiting on other worlds. Creatures that needed someone to believe in them, to see them as individuals rather than threats or specimens. She thought about the message she would carry to every research station, every conservation project, every world where humans and aliens struggled to coexist with dangerous predators. The message was simple. Every creature, no matter how dangerous, had the capacity for trust, for connection, for relationship. All it took was someone willing to see past the teeth and claws, to see the thinking, feeling being underneath, to offer respect instead of control, to choose understanding over fear. Humans had a gift for this kind of connection. It was in their history, their evolution, their very nature as social beings, who had spent thousands of years learning to communicate across species lines. Now, in the galactic community, that gift was needed more than ever. Sophie pulled out her tablet and began writing notes for her next assignment, a water world with intelligent predatory cephalopods that had proven impossible to study. The local researchers were ready to give up. They said the creatures were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too alien. Sophie smiled. She had heard that before. About shrikes. About dozens of other species she had worked with over the years. The trick was simple. Do not approach them as a scientist trying to study them. Approach them as a friend trying to understand them.